Daniel, thank you very much for joining us today. How are things in Madrid?
Things are okay. We can't complain. Good weather, and yeah, Madrid is like an island here in Europe, so it's doing exceedingly well. So we can't complain. Everything good. And thank
So
you
I
very
have
much for having me.
I have yet to have the pleasure of visiting Spain. If I was to go to one city, what would you recommend? Madrid or Barcelona?
Oh, I would recommend Madrid. Barcelona is beautiful, but Barcelona, unfortunately, has slipped quite a bit in terms of security, in terms of a lot of a few things, no? But still, a great city. The great thing about going to Spain is that you can catch a train and you'll be in a couple of hours in Barcelona as well. So I love Barcelona anyway.
I definitely have to go there. So I'm going to move overseas now, and I want to talk about the U.S. economy and get your opinion on the U.S. economy. What are your thoughts as it stands right now? And do you have any concerns with what's happening in the U.S. economy?
Well, in general, the US economy is much stronger than what a lot of people were assuming at the beginning of the year. At the beginning of the year, we even heard that there was going to be a recession and it was going to be a disaster. And the US economy is doing really, really well. The latest estimates of the Atlanta Federal Reserve are at 3.8% for the third quarter annualized growth. Um, and it's a robust level of growth because it's coming from also reducing government spending. It's interesting how we look at many economies and we tend to look at GDP and it doesn't matter the quality of the GDP. So the quality of GDP in the United States is much better now than what it was a year ago, when about a third of the growth came from government spending. No, so government spending down, consumption quite strong, to be fairly honest. Investment doing really well. So it's an economy that is doing better. The employment figures that have been talked that have been dissected quite significantly by a lot of people. If you think about it, the employment figures are not bad either, because once you take into account that there is a significant reduction in immigration jobs, and at the same time there is a massive reduction in government jobs, then private sector jobs are actually doing relatively well. They could do better if the Federal Reserve had not decided to keep elevated rates when there was no reason behind it. No, because of the tariff narrative, and also the tariff the tariff tantrum, as I call it. I think it's now over. No, people have finally realized that you can criticize tariffs for other reasons, but not think that tariffs are going to cause inflation, because they don't mean more units of currency in the system. What causes inflation is more government spending and more printing of money. No, so in general, I would say, compared with all of its peers, the United States is doing very, very well. Uh, Japan is in stagnation. The UK is in stagnation. France is in stagnation. Germany is in stagnation. I mean, the word for the developed economies is stagnation. The United States is growing faster than it grew before with lower government spending. So, in general, I would say that on a relative and on an absolute basis, doing pretty well.
You didn't mention Canada.
Well, yeah, Canada as well. Oh my God, Canada should be growing so fast right now with all of the opportunities in commodities and everything else. And unfortunately, not Canada, obviously, but the Canadian governments decided to go down the route of of Germany, France, and the UK, and delivered the level of growth of Germany, France, and the UK. It's a great country. I mean, Canada has all the opportunities. Canada could be growing at 2.5% right now without any problem whatsoever, if it wasn't for all the regulatory, fiscal, and administrative burdens that the country is suffering. No?
Yeah, I listen. I'm based in Toronto. I think we live in one of the greatest countries in the world. We just don't
Yeah.
have great leadership. And under the last 10 years, under the Liberals, they've just destroyed this economy. We had virtually over the course of 10 years, zero economic growth. It's just
Yeah.
insane what's happened. You did say you're very bullish on the US economy, and
Mm.
you're right. Like a year ago, everybody was talking about recession and they thought tariffs would lead the country into a recession. But here we are a year later, and I can't get over how strong it is. And the stock market, we're a chip shot away from hitting 7,000 on the S&P. Do you have any concerns about the valuation on the S&P or the Nasdaq?
Well, I have concerns, but on a relative basis. No, the S&P 500 is expensive, maybe, but not if you look at it relative to money. Money supply growth globally is soaring, and therefore it's misleading to look at the multiples of the S&P 500 or the Nasdaq or of any stock exchange for that matter in absolute terms and compare them with 20 years ago when we have almost $20 trillion more of global money supply. No, so I think that. Actually, more than 20 trillion. We're talking about more than 38 to 40 trillion. But what is important then is also the divergence between stocks. No, there's enormous level of optimism, and rightly so, with technology giants. But if you look at the S&P 500, for example, by sector, and you strip technology and you look, how are banks trading relative to European banks? How are consumer stocks relative to European consumer stocks? There is a certain premium, but it's not an elevated premium. So I'm not worried about the S&P 500. I may be worried that there's one or two of the now magnificent four. It's gone from the magnificent seven to the magnificent four. That may be exaggeratedly valuated relative to the long-term perspectives. But overall, the S&P 500 I don't see as expensive, particularly, as I said before, compared with the amount of money supply out there.
I got to get your thoughts on inflation. And we recently saw a CPI print. It was at 3%, and the market was very happy because it was below expectations of 3.1%. But I can't get over I'm like I said, I'm in Toronto, and food inflation is just crazy. Like coffee's up 20% year over year. Ground beef is up 12% year over year. Beef tenderloin. Okay, I love beef tenderloin, but I only have it on special occasions. I went to the butcher shop recently and it was $52 a pound. That's Canadian
Yeah,
dollars. That's up $4 in the last month. And if you go back to early 2020, it was probably $25 a pound. And
yeah.
even President Trump is quite concerned about the beef prices. And I'm sure you saw the news on the Argentinian beef tariffs, and he reduced the tariffs and also increased the quotas. And his whole premise is he wants to get the beef prices down in the US. But
Mm.
are you concerned about these inflation rates? And do you think
Oh,
inflation?
I'm concerned about food inflation because it's unjustified relative to the availability and the supply that could be delivered. No, and there's another factor here is how stupid regulation all over the world is hurting the consumer, and it's making eggs, basic goods and very expensive. No, but if you look at the level of inflation in essential goods in the United States, most of the rise, 99% of the rise, happened between 2021 and 2024. What we're having right now is basically a year-on-year very limited increase in prices. But still, I am worried about inflation because inflation is a monetary phenomenon now. And what I don't see anywhere in our nations, in developed nations and emerging nations, is any government willing to reduce government spending, willing to reduce, therefore, artificial money creation, and no government willing to really reduce all the regulatory burdens that have completely obliterated the primary sector. It's ridiculous that we have this kind of food inflation, and we must remember that it's not a fatality. That is not something that just happened out of nowhere. Is that in Europe? Regulation has decimated the available farming ground, has completely destroyed the farming sector, the agriculture sector. All these things end up creating an additional level of inflation than the one that is purely created by the increase in money supply. No, so I am very worried about that because I don't see um, an improvement in that area. I think that there is a widespread understanding that in many countries, in the UK, I hear it all the time, uh, in Germany, etc., that we have gone way too far with net zero policies and regulation. But what I don't see is, okay, what are we going to do about it? Are we going to bring back the importance of the primary and secondary sectors? And it doesn't seem to be the case. So that worries me because it's not just the monetary inflation that is happening in the food in most of the essential goods that we purchase, but those regulatory burdens that are making it more scarce than it would be in normal times.
And Daniel, just because we're on the topic of inflation, why don't we talk about the Fed? The Fed has a dual mandate of full employment and also to control inflation. But despite the persistence of inflation, the Fed has become less restrictive here in the last few months. Maybe it's for political reasons, who knows? But do you think they're making a policy error by cutting interest rates?
I don't think that they're making an error by cutting rates. I think that they made a chain of mistakes of such magnitude in the past 4 years that we are now suffering persistent inflation. First, because they denied the inflationary pressures in 2021, which were obvious to anyone when they increased money supply by 21%, because they continued to deny it for a very long time. And then, and this is a key element, is that people need to understand that rates themselves don't have a very significant impact on inflation if there is not at the same time a significant reduction in money supply. So one of the things that happened in 2023, 2024 was that the Fed was hiking rates, which was hurting the productive sector, small and medium enterprises and families, but government didn't even pay any attention. No, historically, the reason why we think that elevating rates is going to be a way to curb inflation is because that would have immediately triggered a reduction in government spending. Now, we remember that from a long time ago, people like me that have seen so many different crises. But the problem in 21 to 24 was that the entire burden of monetary restriction came on the shoulders of the productive sector. So the government continued to deficit spend and crazily so in the case of the United States, it didn't care about how much they were borrowing. In fact, Janet Yellen implemented the most ridiculous policy, which was to issue mostly very short-term debt, expecting some kind of a miracle. I don't know what she was expecting, but so the government did not care about the increasing rates. In fact, they were passing it on to consumers as well through taxation. But the entire burden of the hike in rates fell on the shoulders of small and medium enterprises and families, creating a larger problem of inequality, because obviously for people that are wealthy, people that have good earnings and a tremendous and already a significant level of income, hiking rates is not a problem. But tell that to somebody that makes $30,000 US dollars a year, no? So why did the Fed make a mistake by not cutting rates these past months. Number one, because they fell into their own created narrative that tariffs cause inflation. Tariffs don't cause inflation. And number two, because they thought that that would maintain, as they tend to say, inflation expectations anchored. They talk about anchored, no, whatever that means. Huh? And so the Fed needs to cut rates in order to allow the productive sector and families to recover from the mistakes of the Fed itself. A lot of people tell me, but why would you care about 25 basis points in terms of rate cuts? How is that going to help SMEs and families? Well, when you go to the United States and you see that an average mortgage is at 6%, and when you see that SMEs are not suffering only from a problem of cost of borrowing, but no access to borrowing, because government bond yields were so elevated that banks were simply hoarding on government bonds and they were not lending to the productive economy. So you've seen between 2022 particularly and 2024 a massive erosion of the opportunities for families and for small and medium enterprises, while obviously the stock market didn't care, because large companies don't care if the rates are 25 or 50 basis points higher or lower, particularly those of the S&P 500 that swim in trillions of cash. And the government did not even care, and therefore monetary policy was actually not working, because the Fed was hiking rates, but the government was not cutting spending, was actually increasing spending, therefore creating a double whammy for families: persistent inflation and high rates. No, so I think that the Fed now needs to cut rates, and I don't think that it's going to be inflationary, for the same reason that we saw that when they cut rates in September, despite not having any reason to do so in the middle of an election of all things, the levels of inflation did not rise either. People are not going to go out and spend like crazy just because you cut rates by 100 basis points.
So that's a great overview of the US. Why don't we move on to another country that you know very well, and that's Argentina. And Argentina just had midterm elections, and Milei
Mm.
won 41% of the vote. Clear mandate to continue on with his austerity plans. However, inflation is still running a little bit hot at
Yeah.
32%. That is down from 200%. But overall, how do you feel Milei is doing? And do you think the country is heading in the right direction?
I think it's important to put it in context, because when I speak in interviews, or when I speak with people in developed economies, it's difficult to grasp the poisonous heritage that he received. No, central bank with $12.5 billion of negative reserves, which is insane, which means basically that the central bank is completely bankrupt, and that means higher inflation in the future. No, second, an economy that was completely destroyed, with negative real GDP growth, but also a massive increase in poverty, 50% poverty, level of destruction of the purchasing power of citizens that was completely unheard of. You just mentioned how in Argentina, people talk about monthly inflation. No, if monthly inflation was at 25% and going to 50 when Milei arrived. So think about that inheritance and what he has done. He has brought inflation down from 25% to less than 3%, as you rightly say, still elevated inflation, but that's why he needs to continue with those reforms. Second, massive reduction of poverty. 10 million people taken out of poverty. Real wages started to increase for the first time in almost a decade, and the budget in a surplus. The economy starting to deregulate, and therefore allowing to breathe small and medium enterprises and exporters. So all those things have been positives. And now the economy is growing at around 5% annualized, which means that it has fully recovered the entire slump inherited from the Peronists. Now, is that enough? Obviously not. Argentina has been devastated, devastated. No? The Argentines, when you go to Buenos Aires or any of the regions in Argentina, they always say, "Be very careful because we come from the future." No, they say to us in Canada, in Spain, in France, "Keep doing it. Huh? We did that 70 years ago." No. So it needs to do a lot more. And now is when you're going to have at least a clear path in which he can take important measures like an entire regulation of the labor market overhaul, complete change of the labor market, the taxation reform, and also lifting entirely all of the monetary limitations that the country unfortunately still needs to have because of this inherited poison pill of the negative reserves of the central bank.
So all in all, you think he's heading in the right direction?
Yeah, yeah, I think he's doing. I think he's doing. I think a lot of people say the Milei experiment. No, the experiment was what they did before. The experiment was what we saw in the last years, and the path to Venezuela, in which Argentina was headed to. No, and I think that yes, he is doing the right thing. And more importantly, he is doing the right things at the right time. A lot of people say, "Oh, he should have dollarized already." Uh, Tell me, how do you deal then with the negative reserves of the central bank, which means that if you immediately default on those obligations, that would obliterate the banking sector. No, so he is basically he's dealing with one of the most dangerous and difficult uh, economic situations in the world. And more importantly, and I think that this is what a lot of people unfairly don't understand or don't want to understand, which is the number of poison pills that the Peronists had left so that they would explode in subsequent months and generate a change in power that would bring them back to controlling the government. No?
Daniel, I want to move on to another country in South America, and that's Venezuela. This is been in the news quite a bit here in the last few months. The U.S. has destroyed 7 vessels, killing 32 people, allegedly all drug traffickers. And the U.S. has also deployed a carrier strike group from the Mediterranean to the Caribbean. The purpose is to detect, monitor, and disrupt illicit actors and activities in the Western Hemisphere. There's been a lot of speculation that Trump wants a regime change in Venezuela. What are your thoughts on this?
Um, does Trump want a regime change in Venezuela? I think that Trump wants the results of the elections to be honored. No, let's remember that Maduro is usurping power in Venezuela. Is that he has, for the second time, cheated on election and maintained himself in power, and that because he is in a very challenging situation in the past 7 years, he has embraced sort of partnership with drug traffickers, armed traffickers, and all these the cartels that are sending drugs to the United States. No, so it's become narco dictatorship to such crazy extent that anybody that lives in Venezuela understands that the drug traffickers, the criminals, are the new authorities in many of the regions in Venezuela. Something that is not that different either in Mexico and in Colombia. Very, very dangerous path. A lot of these authoritarian leaders try to perpetuate themselves in power by embracing partnerships with these drug cartels. No, so the situation is basically very simple. Is that Maduro needs to step down or needs to be allowed to step down in a forceful way because Maduro has lost the elections over and over, at least in the last two times, unequivocally, and maintains his grip on power only based on violence and on repression. No, so the United States is the United States going to force a regime change? I think that what the United States is not going to do is what the Biden administration did, which was to believe that the regime change or that the return of a democratic regime would come from a negotiated and sort of agreement between the Maduro regime and the opposition. It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous to believe that Maduro, that has killed more than 9,000 people in Venezuela, that maintains hundreds of political prisoners, is simply going to relinquish power or negotiate something with people that he simply does not even consider as accepted opponents. No, so I think that that has to change at some point. I think that the position of the European Union and of the United States between 2016 and 2024 was a mistake. Was a mistake because ultimately what happened was that Maduro retained power through violence and repression, and basically always said, "Oh yeah, yeah, we're going to have a dialogue," and never had any dialogue, and obviously it did not lead to anything. No.
And from an economic point of view, Venezuela is a total mess. Like we were talking about how high the inflation is or was in Argentina, it's significantly higher in Venezuela.
Yeah, significantly to the point that you can travel around Venezuela. You go to Maracaibo, you look at the water, and you see notes, no, in the water floating. You see in Caracas, you can see them on the street. The bolivar is worth absolutely nothing. No, and what Maduro has done is to dollarize the economy in a hidden way. So basically, the civil servants and the people receiving a salary are still being paid in this completely worthless currency that they issue. But when you go to Caracas, you kind of believe it because you see these incredible cars. The restaurants are completely full. You see, like it seems like everything is booming, and that's because this sort of hidden economy built over the drug trafficking and the agreement with the government is actually taking over everything and controlling what could be a thriving economy, but what they're doing basically is make it a hostage state.
And just because we're focused on South America right now, we got to talk about Colombia. President Trump has expressed concern about what's happening there. What are your thoughts about Colombia and what happens going forward?
But it's incredible that Colombia, that has seen the inflow of immigrants from Venezuela escaping the disasters of the Chavez regime and the Maduro regime, which were both the same party, decided to vote for the same thing. It's pretty amazing to me. I just cannot believe that Gustavo Petro, the current president of Colombia, actually was in power because what he is basically doing is exactly the same as what Hugo Chavez did at the beginning of his time in power, no? Which is to demolish independent institutions, to destroy the economy internally, and to give a lot of subsidies to people that are paid with a currency that is going to be massively devaluated in the future. No? So the situation in Colombia is really, really poor. Is really poor as well because Petro has already established a number of elements of disruption in independent institutions that have elevated the power of the terrorists, the armed terrorists, and the drug dealers. No, so ultimately that is also a very very dangerous situation. And at the same time, the economy is not doing well in any shape or form. It's a very very weak economy. It's just been downgraded. The government continues to spend money that they don't have. I mean, it's point by point what the Chavez regime did. A lot of people ask me, why would they do it if they know that it's not going to work? Because it works perfectly for the people that steal the money, the leaders at the top. No, the Maduro family is immensely wealthy. No, and that is it's an extractive and confiscatory system that is certainly. It's going to be very difficult because I don't. The other problem in Colombia is that the opposition, like in Venezuela with Chavez at the beginning, they continue to believe in the past. They continue to believe that things are going to be, oh, there will be an election, people will vote, and everything will be different. No, he has already destroyed independent institutions, the legal system, the vote count system, etc., etc. So I'm not optimistic about Colombia, unfortunately.
You raised a very interesting point when you said the people from Venezuela who migrated over to Colombia, why would they vote for the same type of government? And it's always impossible to understand how people think and why they vote the way they do. And the same thing has happened in Canada. Like, as you know, we just had an election a
Yeah.
few months ago. We have a new prime minister, but this is the fourth consecutive term that Canadians have voted for this government. And I don't understand why, because to me, if you couldn't get things right in 10 years, you don't deserve another chance. But yet the Canadian, majority continue to vote for this government. So it's just one of those things.
Well, this is what happens, no? Is that a lot of people fall into the trap of believing that these interventionist policies have not worked because they were not implemented by the right person. But it's not a problem of the cook, it's a problem of the recipe. And people just don't understand that it just doesn't work. It's not a question of whether it's Trudeau or whether it's Carney. It's a question of those policies destroy economies in France, in the UK. It doesn't matter if it's Macron. It doesn't matter if it's Merkel. It doesn't matter if it's Rishi Sunak from a Conservative party or if it's Starmer from a Labour party. Is that consistently destroying the productive sector with more regulation, with more taxes, putting more and more burdens on investment, more and more burdens on economic growth, believing that the private sector will always have plenty of room to adapt to those. And at the same time, increasing immigration and public spending is a monster recipe that always ends up with stagnation and social discontent. And and Canada, as I said prior, is that Canada is a country that should be growing at a 2.5 minimum 3.5% level right now. But obviously, what you hear over and over again from pension funds, from investment firms, from business owners, from companies. Oh, it's impossible. We can't do this. We're going to just to receive a permit. It's going to take 5 years. The taxation is completely ridiculous. The regulation is completely out of control. That obviously is the problem, no? And people think, oh, it didn't work because it was implemented by Trudeau, but if it's implemented by Carney, it's going to be better. No, it's going to be exactly the same. No, a good friend of mine always says that socialism is judged by its intentions and capitalism is judged by its worst results. Not by its results, by its worst results. So what happens is that the Colombians, they see what happened in Venezuela and they say, ah, yeah, but that's because it was implemented by Chavez and Maduro. We're going to do it better. And it's the same. It is exactly the same. In Mexico, In Mexico, you have seen it as well, no? Ah, López Obrador, etc. In Argentina, over and over for 70 years. Is this mirage? I always say that the average human being suffers the worst economic shock when they're a kid, which is to find out that Santa Claus doesn't exist. And then from that moment onwards throughout their lives, they try to find in the state, yeah, the Santa Claus that they found doesn't exist. And obviously it doesn't work.
Danielle, we only have a couple of months left in the year, and we're going to be in 2026 before you know it. Hard to believe. But when you look out into 2026, what are your views on the US economy? Do you have any concerns, or do you think it's going to continue to grow at this 3% rate?
I think that the US economy is going to do well in 2026, particularly because all of the headwinds that came from trade negotiations, from a new administration, from the animosity of many investors, etc., is likely to be left behind, and people just move on and remember what happened in the second year of the first Trump administration. So I think that the U.S. economy is going to do relatively well, and particularly well compared to Germany, France, UK, Japan. Um, Concerns. My biggest concern is that the new administration doesn't do enough to reduce deficit spending. No? So far, government spending has been reduced a little bit. A lot of new revenues coming from tariffs, but there needs to be a lot more done in terms of reducing government spending in order to rein on the deficit. And that is a challenge.
And in terms of the stock market, do you have a target
I'm
for the S&P? So we're just a chip shot away from 7,000. Where do you think we go a year from now?
well, my estimate is that in 2026, global money supply will likely grow between 10 to 13%, which means that risky assets should rise more than that, no? Simply to maintain the same level of valuation relative to money supply. The only thing that would change it would be if the fiscal problem of Japan, the fiscal problem of France, the fiscal problem of the UK would lead to their governments reining on spending and therefore bringing down money supply growth. I don't think it's going to happen. Look at what happened in Japan. They voted for somebody that would print even more and spend even more. No, so I think that it's still a good environment to invest in equities. It's still a good environment to invest in gold, despite the current correction. It's still a good environment and it's an interesting environment to start looking at, for example, energy commodities that have been very, very weak in the past couple of years, because the monetary aspect is certainly supporting the situation that we've just mentioned, an improvement in risky assets, and at the same time, the the biggest challenge on a macro level are likely to be behind the trade war, the challenges of these fiscal problems. So I think it's more likely to be a year of consolidation, probably not the same level of exuberance that we have seen this year, but with a positive outlook for risky assets.
So bullish on the US economy. You don't see any risk of a recession at all in 2026. And you're bullish
We're
on
not going.
stocks.
Now, do I see a risk of recession? Could we have 2 quarters of negative GDP growth? We could, but that doesn't mean necessarily a recession. No, that is a technical recession, but we already had that in 2021, if I'm not wrong, 2022, sorry, in 2022, and the stock market continued to rise. So I'm looking more at how at the increase in money, and the obviously we're going to have a much more accommodative position from central banks. Central banks are going to be mostly cutting rates in 2026. So what is the biggest risk for equity markets in 2026? Inflation. Hmm? Inflation. If the situation of inflation right now goes from persistent to rising, that would be a problem because then obviously margin calls would start to appear in many places.
Yeah, I think one of the things that's saving us right now is the price of oil. It's hanging around this $60 level. And if it were to rip to 80 or $100 for any reason, oh my God, all bets would be off then.
Yeah, no, that would be exceedingly negative. Think about this. It's a very good point. We're talking about stagnation in the UK and Germany and France. Those are huge commodity importers. If any of those had $80 barrel oil, all of them would be in a huge recession. No? So we have, let's say, we know that OPEC and the US producers are very comfortable at these levels and that OPEC is willing to continue to increase production to support the Chinese economy. OPEC is increasing production because they don't want to upset their clients. No? But obviously, if there is a strong shift in supply versus demand and or any type of secular or at least short-term trend upward, that could certainly generate a significant impact on developed economies. No?
Well, Daniel, that was a great discussion, and I want to thank you very much for spending time with us today and sharing your thoughts. If someone would like to follow you online or check out some of your services, where can they go?
Oh, thank you very much. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I think I always say that it's easier to find me than to avoid me. So if you key in Google Daniel Lacalle, you will find that I have a Twitter account in English, a Twitter account in Spanish, a YouTube channel in Spanish, and a YouTube channel in English. And my website, dlacalle.com, is also in Spanish and English. Always remember that if the first thing that you find is in Spanish, that there is an English alternative. So it will only take you a little bit more time to find the English alternative.
Daniel, once again, thank you.
Thank you very much. Great pleasure.